All right, we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar today. Thank you for joining. I am Jim Shine, the Chief Operating Officer of Top Step Consulting. What we're going to be talking about today is OpenAir's recent change to move to OCI. OCI is Oracle's cloud infrastructure. If you are familiar with Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or Google Cloud, you can think of OCI is similar to those platforms. Now, Oracle would dispute that. They feel they are a second generation cloud platform, while these are first generation cloud platforms. But I'm not going to get into that debate. Suffice it to say, they function in a similar fashion. And if you're familiar with any of those, then you've got the basic understanding of what the Oracle cloud infrastructure is. Basically, all it is Oracle's cloud application platform. So it allows them to maintain all of their applications in one set of server farms with one maintenance schedule, with lots of flexibility between hardware and the software systems. But the reason for this, there's a few reasons for this we're going to talk about. What this will provide is improved reliability, scalability, performance, and security. I know that performance item is probably interesting to folks. We'll talk about that a little bit here as well. Why are they doing this? Well, there's a technological improvement for doing this. The servers that Oracle has access to on their cloud systems are superior to the servers that Oracle. In addition, they have more horsepower, more servers. They're able to allocate processors and memory as needed across the cloud. It allows significant flexibility to their systems. It is a significant improvement in terms of just the technology involved. It's going to save Oracle some money. They're going to be able to shut down their OpenAir data centers, their OpenAir server farms that have been dedicated to just running OpenAir. It allows them to move that to this cloud infrastructure that they're already supporting. It's going to provide significant consistency in the maintenance across Oracle's product lines, particularly across the NetSuite family of products. We are expecting that OpenAir and NetSuite will run on similar maintenance cycles now instead of what has been very disparate maintenance cycles up to this point. So there's some consistency improvements for Oracle on this. And then a lot of the automation that they use in their server farms are going to be improved by moving to their cloud infrastructure, including their backups and disaster recovery processes and some of their security methods. So there's significant benefits to Oracle for moving these to their cloud infrastructure. And this has been their plan for some time. They were finally able to make that happen. When and how is this change occurring? Now, I know you're probably most interested in what this change actually means. We're going to get into that in the next couple slides. But before we do, I wanted to give you an understanding of kind of the time frame of what's occurring. So when you see the changes that need to be made, you kind of have an understanding of what your timing would be in terms of your individual organizations. The OpenAir sandbox environments have already been replicated in Oracle's cloud. They're already over there. You probably, if you have a sandbox instance and you've logged in recently, you've probably noticed that the address has changed to that sandbox instance. The address you've been using has worked, but it automatically redirects to a new address. That's because this has already been moved to the cloud. Currently, they are running the legacy configuration and the OCI configuration simultaneously. What that means is that the old address that you use, old URL that you used to get to the sandbox still works. That's the legacy configuration. Those are going to continue to work until January XX. Now, I left that as XX for a reason. We were initially given a date of January 25th. And that seems to be the case for most folks. However, I am hearing that other clients have received other dates directly from Oracle. Everything in January, everything in and around that 25th date, 26th, 24th, 27th, that kind of thing. So if you have received a different date than the 25th from Oracle, then that's the date that is going to apply to your instance. But that's the date that we've been given, is in and around January 25th. In other words, by the end of this week, chances are your sandbox.openair.com address is not going to work anymore. So it's timely that we're having this conversation now. The OpenAir production environments have not started moving to the cloud. They will start being replicated in February. The exact timing in February is again dependent on your instance. Looks like they are moving in and around the 22nd of February. So you can expect to start seeing a change in your URL, in your address to your production environment right around the 22nd of February. That will also be simultaneously configured to run the legacy address and the new cloud address after that February date. So there's nothing you have to worry about when that February date rolls around. Nothing's going to be off limits. You're not going to be cut off from the system. Things aren't going to start breaking. Those legacy configurations and the new configurations will both be functional as of that February date. And those will work through May and again, XX. We are expecting that this will be probably the weekend before the Memorial Day weekend. Unfortunately, I don't have that date handy. I should have looked it up. But I didn't want to put it in writing anyway because we don't really know yet what that date will be. But for approximately 3 months, from February 22nd through somewhere similar in May, 3rd or 4th week of May, the production environments will use both the legacy configuration and address and the new cloud configuration and address. Both be available. All right, so what does this mean to you? It's really not that impactful, fortunately. The only obvious impact to you is then it's going to be that the URL for OpenAir, the web address that you use to access OpenAir, is going to change. So for example, the current sandbox URL that you're used to for the last many, many, many years has been the https sandbox.openair.com. In a few days, that's not going to work anymore. The new sandbox URL is going to be https and then your company ID .app.sandbox.openair.com. So 5 parts to that: your company ID, app, sandbox, OpenAir.com. Now that company ID is what you are currently using in the company ID field on your login when you're going into your sandbox. The exception to that is if you have characters in that company ID that a URL can't handle. Now, what that means are spaces, periods, commas, ampersands. Basically, anything that's not a letter or a number is not going to be recognizable by a URL. In those cases, OpenAir has changed those to dashes. I'm sorry, let me be very specific on that. Not underscores, but the // character. So for example, our sandbox instance right now is top space step space sandbox. With the new sandbox, it's top dash step dash sandbox .app.sandbox.openair.com. Now you don't have to remember any of that because if you log into your sandbox today, you'll see that it automatically has redirected you to that new URL. So you'll see it right there in your browser, in your address bar. That's exactly what's going to happen when production moves in February to the cloud as well. When you log into your production instance, it will redirect you to that new URL. So you don't have to worry about trying to communicate what that URL is going to be. It will be obvious. As soon as you log in, you'll see that it redirects to that URL, and you can copy and paste it anywhere you need. Again, the current production URLs are www.openair.com. The new production URLs are going to have your company ID .app.openair.com. Now, what else does this mean to you? Well, if you're a large organization and you're moving to this cloud, you're probably going to see performance improvements, and maybe even pretty significant performance improvements. The hardware and configuration that you're moving to is simply much better suited to handle an application such as OpenAir than a standard server farm would be. So you're probably going to see some pretty significant improvements in performance, especially running larger, longer reports. Now, why do I say this only applies to larger organizations? There's only so much of the performance of the tool that is related to the data. With every action that you can take in OpenAir, there's some overhead that has to happen regardless. And so with a small organization, you're not going to see as much time savings, because the time savings performance improvement is really going to happen on data retrieval, and in terms of the amount of data that is trying to be calculated, or summarized, or retrieved. It doesn't mean you're not going to see performance improvements. You probably will. They're just not going to be as noticeable. So what do you have to do? Well, the only thing you have to do is worry about that address/URL. Anywhere that thing is referenced has to change. That includes OpenAir Integration Manager shortcuts, if you're using that tool. I believe they've renamed now OpenAir Professional Connector. Using that tool and you have saved shortcuts, those will not work once this goes into play. Those will need to change the address that they are pointing to. OpenAir Exchange Manager, if you're using this with Microsoft Exchange, that will have to be reconfigured. OpenAir Business Connector, the OData connection, if you're familiar with it from that language. If that is where you're pointing back to OpenAir to get those OData feeds, those will have to be repointed to the new address. All of those so far are really pretty simple. Changing those is just a matter of finding them in the configuration, altering them, moving on. Integrations using third-party tools can be a lot more effort. Any tool that you might be using, Celigo, Boomi, Jitterbit, anything that's integrating OpenAir to another instance of another piece of software is going to be impacted. And you'll need to find in your integrations where you are referencing the OpenAir server, and you'll need to change the URL of the server in those tools. And you'll need to make sure that you find it everywhere that you are referencing the server. For example, with Dell Boomi, you are able to set up a connector and point to the address of your server in that connector. And as long as you are only referencing that connector, that single connector, every time that you reference OpenAir, then that connector is the only place you're going to have to change. Just one change and done. If you have other instances within your integrations where you are referencing a different connector pointing to OpenAir, for example, if you're pointing to OpenAir through a standard HTML connector web service instead of the standard connector, you'll have to make sure you find where that happens and change that as well. It's a little bit technical, a little bit complicated, but it's a matter of identifying all of the places that are using these addresses and making sure they're changed. If you do not change them, the impact will be obvious. You don't have to worry about, oh, is it going to pull data from the wrong source if I miss one and I'm not going to notice, I'm going to get bad reports. No, you'll notice because the entire thing will crash. So it'll be really obvious. If you are using if you will, legacy Salesforce integration, if you don't know what I'm referencing, I'll give you a quick history. Back 5-6 years ago, OpenAir and Salesforce had an integration that was built into OpenAir that would could pull data from Salesforce, and that is not supported anymore. Has not been supported in many years. For a lot of clients, that's started to fail over the last couple of years. It stopped working, and they've had to replace it. But a number of clients are still able to use that. If you are still using that, there are pieces within Salesforce that will need to be changed. Salesforce has the address of the OpenAir server within its component, and that'll have to be altered. The standard NetSuite integration itself, OpenAir to NetSuite and back and forth, is not impacted. Because that's housed completely within OpenAir and NetSuite, they're able to make those changes themselves without you having to do anything. So that is one integration you do not have to worry about. It will still function smoothly without any interruption. If you are using OpenAir single sign-on through SAML, which is really the only way to do it these days, you will need to import new metadata from that address there. And you will have received that, your OpenAir administrators will have received that address in an email directly from OpenAir. If they haven't, it's right there on the screen. You'll need to import new metadata from that and update your identity provider with the metadata that comes from that URL. So just be aware of that. Your single sign-on with SAML will fail unless you do this. If you have scripts within NetSuite, if you are a NetSuite user and you have suite scripts within NetSuite that point to OpenAir, those will need to change. I don't think that's very common. It's not going to impact too many folks. If it will impact you, you'll know it, because you will know that you have a script in NetSuite that points directly to OpenAir. Again, don't confuse this with the NetSuite OpenAir integration. That is not impacted. These are for one-off things that someone might have done in their NetSuite system to pull data from OpenAir for some purpose other than through the standard integration. And then the NetSuite single sign-on. If you have that where you're getting the OpenAir forms within NetSuite, so you have they call it NetSuite single sign-on. I think personally that's a misnomer, but it's basically the feature that allows you to see OpenAir within NetSuite. If you have that, that will also need to be altered because that's pointing to the OpenAir server. So those are the 7-ish examples where you could have a URL pointing to OpenAir that's going to need to change. There are others besides these that we've listed that you may have. If you're using a BI tool that somehow you're pointing directly to OpenAir's API, you'd need to worry about that. If you have scripts within OpenAir itself, those are not going to be impacted. So there's no concern with those. Those, again, because they're wholly contained within OpenAir, you don't have to worry about those particular scripts. So in terms of what you have to do, it's a matter of identifying which of your applications are contacting OpenAir and making sure they've got the new address in place. Other information for you related to this. In some of the emails that went out from OpenAir, they indicated that you would need to request this switch. Use account-specific domain. Okay? They said you will need to request this switch. They kind of came to their senses in November and said, well, since every single client is going to have this switch, there's no exceptions, we'll just do it ourselves. And so in December, on the 5th of December, they enabled that switch for every sandbox instance, every OpenAir sandbox instance. For production, they will be enabling that on the 18th. That is just a heads up piece of information. It's not going to impact you at all. The only reason that we even bring it up is so you are aware you do not have to request that switch anymore. They published these dates recently and indicated they would just do it themselves. Other script requirements, this is what we talked about. If you have scripts running within OpenAir, unless they're contacting another OpenAir instance, and we do know of a few of these where we've built scripts for folks that exist in their sandbox information and are publishing data to production. So for example, when they have something they want to, they've implemented some new booking types, they've implemented some new expense items in their sandbox, and they're done testing them, and now they want to push them to production. They've got a script that will do that instead of having to do manually. If you do have something like that, where it's referencing another OpenAir instance, those will have to be changed because that OpenAir instance address is no longer valid. That's pretty rare. I only know of a couple folks using something like that. And if you are using that, you know it. So there's not going to be any surprises with that. That is all the information that we have to share with you today. This is a change. I don't want to say it's much ado about nothing, but what it really is much ado about really something that's not going to impact you very heavily. The integrations are fairly simple to change, and you have a significant window. I applaud OpenAir for the method that they are using to push this out, where they're turning the change on in February in production and giving you 3 months to find a way to ensure that your integrations are working and settled. Thanks again for your time.